When we reflect on memory, we usually picture images, stories, and specific moments we can consciously recall. But the most profound memories are not stored solely in the mind. They live deep within the body. They are encoded in the nervous system, locked in the muscles, woven into the breath, and held in the way the heart learns to protect itself. This is precisely why a person can claim they have moved on, forgiven, or forgotten, yet still feel restless, anxious, or empty without understanding why. The body remembers what the mind tries to escape. For the narcissist, this principle is especially true. So much of their identity is constructed on a foundation of denial, on constantly rewriting the past to preserve an image of themselves that feels tolerable. They might tell themselves that what they did was justified, exaggerated, or completely misunderstood. They may even convince the people around them of the exact same story. However, the nervous system does not respond to constructed stories. It responds to truth. And when truth is systematically avoided, it manifests as chronic, physical, and emotional tension. There is a real reason why so many people who cause harm to others live in a state of constant agitation or quiet dissatisfaction. It is not because they are being punished by fate or karma. It is because their bodies are carrying experiences they never allowed themselves to fully feel. Guilt, shame, fear, and grief do not magically vanish just because they are ignored. They simply go underground. They surface as ongoing restlessness, sudden rage, emotional numbness, or an insatiable need for constant distraction. Whatever is not properly integrated eventually becomes intense internal pressure. From a psychological standpoint, trauma is not merely what happened to us. Trauma is what occurs inside us when we are unable to process what happened. When the narcissist inflicted harm, they simultaneously created a profound wound within themselves. But instead of confronting that reality, they built a false self to shield themselves from the pain. They learned to control, perform, and manipulate so they would never have to confront the heavy weight of their actions. Yet the true cost of that continuous avoidance is a state of chronic disconnection from their own inner life. This is why no amount of external success, admiration, or validation ever truly satisfies them. Their nervous system is still carrying that unresolved experience. It is still bracing itself. It is still scanning for threats. It is still holding on to everything that was never released. They may appear confident on the outside, but on the inside, there is often a quiet chaos they cannot even name. They live with a persistent sense that something is missing, something is deeply wrong, and something remains fundamentally unresolved. And this is where the truth becomes completely unavoidable. The body has no interest in self-deception. It is naturally designed to move toward wholeness. It seeks genuine resolution rather than a polished performance. When a person refuses to feel their emotions, the body becomes the reluctant keeper of everything that was denied. Every attempt to outrun the past only tightens the grip of what remains unhealed. For you, understanding this reality can be deeply liberating. It shifts the entire narrative away from a desire for revenge and places it squarely in reality. You no longer need them to admit what they did to you. You no longer need validation or an apology from the person who caused you harm. The consequences are already unfolding on their own, not through some external punishment, but through the simple and unavoidable mechanics of being human. What is not faced is continuously carried. What is not healed is endlessly repeated. What is not felt is permanently stored. You were never crazy for feeling the heavy impact of what transpired. Your nervous system was simply responding to the truth. And now, as you do the work to heal, you are finally releasing what never actually belonged to you in the first place. There is another critical layer to this truth that often gets overlooked. It is not only the harm they caused that remains with them, but also the vibrant parts of you they tried so hard to erase. The confidence they mocked, the sensitivity they dismissed, the boundaries they resented, and the inner light they attempted to dim. None of those qualities simply disappear. Instead, they become a permanent, silent presence within their inner world, serving as a constant reminder of something they could neither control nor destroy. When someone attempts to break another human being, they are actually revealing what threatens them the most. Your strength, your depth, and your capacity to love and feel were never weaknesses. They were clear mirrors reflecting everything the narcissist could not tolerate within themselves. They attacked you not because you were flawed, but because you were alive in ways they simply were not. Even now, those vibrant qualities follow them like an inescapable shadow. Psychologically, this dynamic is rooted in projection and intense envy. The narcissist sees in you the exact traits they learned to suppress within themselves just to survive, such as authenticity, vulnerability, and genuine emotional presence. Rather than mourning what they lost within themselves, they try to eliminate those qualities in you. But attempting to destroy those traits in another person never brings peace. It only intensifies their own internal conflict. What they tried so desperately to destroy becomes the very thing that haunts them. They may try to move on to new relationships, new environments, or new versions of themselves. Yet, the underlying dynamic inevitably repeats itself. Eventually, they encounter someone who unconsciously reminds them of you. Someone who carries that same light, that same independence, and that same emotional truth. Once again, they experience that familiar discomfort, the same urge to control, and the same impulse to diminish the other person. The pattern is never actually about the other individual. It is always about what remains completely unresolved within themselves. This is why your survival and your healing are not just personal victories. They are deeply symbolic. Every single time you choose yourself, every time you grow, and every time you live your life fully, you embody a truth they can never erase. You prove that you were never the problem. Your continued existence directly challenges the false narrative they carefully constructed to justify their behavior. You serve as living evidence that their attempts to dominate and destroy you did not define your ultimate worth. There is also a deeper philosophical element at play here. What we try to harm in others is very often what we have disowned within ourselves. The narcissist completely disowned their own vulnerability, their valid human needs, and their deep-seated fear of abandonment. When they see those exact qualities existing openly and unashamedly in you, it stirs an overwhelming grief that they cannot bring themselves to acknowledge. Rather than sitting with that grief, they quickly convert it into contempt, coldness, or a drive for control. Yet, directly beneath all that anger lies a profound sense of loss, the tragic loss of a true self they never learned to keep. So, they end up carrying you with them wherever they go, not in a state of fond longing, but in memory, not with genuine affection, but as unfinished business. The essential parts of you they tried to break end up becoming painful reminders of the authentic life they systematically avoided. And no matter how far or how fast they run, they can never truly outrun that reality. You were never meant to disappear or fade away. Your light was never theirs to take in the first place. In the quiet, unavoidable places of their own mind, they cannot escape the truth. Your survival speaks clearly for itself. Yet another truth that relentlessly follows them is the very emotion they work the hardest to bury, which is guilt. Not the conscious kind of guilt that allows a person to openly admit their mistakes, but the subterranean kind that lives underground, quietly shaping a person's entire inner world without their conscious awareness. The narcissist may continually deny any wrongdoing, endlessly justify their harmful behaviors, and repeatedly convince themselves that they were merely misunderstood. But the human psyche does not simply erase what it fundamentally knows to be true. Instead, it reorganizes itself around that buried knowledge, carrying the full weight of its own unspoken choices through every single day, quietly shaping a reality where nothing can ever truly be forgotten, because the body and the mind both remember the path that was left behind. When guilt is not consciously faced and processed, it does not simply evaporate into thin air. Instead, it quietly becomes a silent architect. It dictates the way they view themselves, the way they relate to everyone around them, and the fundamental way they move through the world. It manifests constantly as intense defensiveness, as shifting blame onto others, and as an unrelenting, compulsive need to always be right. It shows up in their total inability to rest, their incapacity to feel truly at ease, and their struggle to ever trust another person. The conscious mind may stubbornly repeat the sentence that I did nothing wrong, but the body and the vast unconscious mind tell an entirely different story. From a psychological standpoint, this is the steep cost of emotional disconnection. When a person repeatedly refuses to take genuine responsibility for the harm they cause, they fracture their own inner world. One part of them knows the absolute truth of what happened, while another part desperately fights to suppress it. That continuous inner conflict creates a deep structural tension that never resolves. They become permanently trapped in an endless loop of self-justification and emotional avoidance. And within that exhausting loop, real peace is completely impossible to find. This explains why so many individuals who cause severe emotional harm seem continuously restless, agitated, or perpetually dissatisfied with their lives. They are not being targeted or punished by some external force. They are simply living with a severe internal contradiction. The more they deny the truth, the more rigid and brittle their personality becomes. The harder they defend their false narrative, the further away they move from their own basic humanity. Guilt, when it is properly acknowledged and felt, can serve as a doorway to repair and true transformation. But when it is endlessly denied, it turns inward, becoming an invisible weight that the body must carry forever. When buried deep within, guilt transforms into a psychological prison. There is an inescapable philosophical truth here. We cannot escape the real consequences of our actions, only the way we choose to interpret them. The narcissist endlessly interprets their past through the lens of distortion, yet the underlying emotional residue always remains. It quietly shapes their self-image in profound ways they cannot consciously govern or control. They might relentlessly seek external admiration just to feel worthy, or exert dominance over others to feel safe. But these behavioral strategies are ultimately desperate attempts to outrun something that lives directly inside them. For you, grasping this fundamental truth can bring a profound sense of release and peace. You no longer have to carry the heavy burden of their ongoing denial. You no longer need them to admit what they did or offer a sincere apology for the pain they caused. The consequences are already actively unfolding. Not in the form of dramatic external punishment, but as an uncomfortable internal state of being. Their entire life becomes rigidly structured around avoidance, control, and emotional distance. This occurs because that guarded stance is the only way they know how to live alongside what they refuse to face. Here is an enduring truth. Guilt that remains unhealed does not simply fade away with time. It gradually becomes the very architecture of the soul. They may never speak these realities out loud, but their ongoing life is already broadcasting them clearly. What inevitably follows unacknowledged guilt is not peaceful reflection, but endless repetition. When a person resolutely refuses to face the truth of what they have done, they do not move forward in life. Instead, they move in endless circles. The narcissist may abandon one relationship, leave one job, or relocate to a brand new environment, genuinely believing they are finally starting fresh with a clean slate. Yet the exact same destructive patterns quietly reassemble themselves every single time. This happens because the deep internal wound driving their behavior has never been addressed or healed. This represents one of the most widely misunderstood realities of narcissistic behavior. Most people naturally assume that when a person exits your life, they get to walk away completely clean and unburdened. But psychologically, that is simply not how the human mind operates. Whatever remains unhealed is inevitably carried forward into the future. It continuously seeks a fresh outlet for expression, not necessarily because the person actively desires to hurt others, but because unresolved internal pain demands to be felt. Until that pain is consciously examined, it will repeatedly recreate itself. So, the narcissist constantly meets new people, builds new connections, and crafts a brand new story about who they are. Yet the underlying dynamic remains eerily familiar across every single chapter. The initial phase of idealization eventually returns, quickly followed by subtle control, sudden emotional withdrawal, projection of blame, and ultimately absolute collapse. It is a sequence of different faces reading from the exact same emotional script. This does not happen because of cruel fate, but because the human psyche is naturally driven to repeat what it cannot resolve. From a trauma-informed perspective, this behavior reflects a nervous system permanently stuck in survival mode. The narcissist learned very early in life that vulnerability was incredibly dangerous. They internalized the belief that power and outward image were far safer than genuine authenticity. Those early emotional adaptations once served to protect a vulnerable child. But over time, those defensive mechanisms hardened into rigid personality traits. Now, even when they attempt to move on, their body and mind automatically default back to what feels familiar. They choose dominance over authentic intimacy and control over true heart connection. This endless repetition is not a sign of success or moving forward. It is profound stagnation cleverly disguised as forward motion, and it slowly erodes their life from the inside out. Each completed cycle leaves behind an increasing pile of emotional debris, including broken trust, fractured relationships, and unspoken harm. Over time, the narcissist becomes increasingly isolated, more emotionally disconnected, and more deeply convinced that everyone else in the world is the real problem. Yet deep down beneath the denial, there is a growing, uncomfortable awareness that the sole common denominator in every single relational collapse is actually themselves. Philosophically speaking, this is the true cost of perpetually avoiding self-confrontation. We often mistakenly believe that freedom comes from escaping certain people, places, or difficult situations. But genuine freedom only comes from directly facing the internal patterns within ourselves. When someone refuses to look inward, they remain hopelessly bound to their own personal history. They live out the exact same painful chapter over and over again, constantly hoping the ending will somehow change without them ever having to change themselves. For you, this truth offers a very different and profound kind of closure. You are not the failed exception to their rule. You were simply one chapter in a much larger ongoing narrative. They will continue to repeat these exact patterns long into the future. Their fundamental inability to heal means they will keep recreating the same toxic emotional terrain over and over again, even when you are no longer in their life. The continuous cycle itself is the ongoing consequence. What is not healed is never truly left behind. It is simply lived out all over again. As the cycle endlessly repeats and the heavy weight of that repetition grows heavier with time, something else begins to happen just beneath the surface. The narcissist may still appear confident, accomplished, or even superior to the outside world, but internally, the psychological structure holding their identity together becomes increasingly fragile, fracturing slowly under the unrelenting pressure of everything they have tried so hard to outrun.